Unit 13 The First World War Causes and Consequences Structure 13.0 Objectives 13.1 Introduction 13.2 Causes of the World War 13.2.1 The System of Secret Alliances 13.2.2 Militarism 13.2.3 Nationalism 13.2.4 Urge to Imperialism 13.2.5 Newspapers, Press and the Public Opinion 13.2.6 The Immediate Cause 13.3 Consequences of the War 13.3.1 Loss of Human Lives 13.3.2 Social and Economic Changes 13.3.3 Democratic Ideals 13.3.4 The Conference of Paris 1919 13.3.5 The New Balance of Power 13.3.6 The New International Machinery 13.4 World War and India 13.5 Let us sum up 13.6 Keywords 13.7 Answers to check your progress exercises 13.0 Objectives. After reading this unit, you would get acquainted with the First World War as a major event in history of the world. Have an idea about the main causes which led to the conflagration of 1914. Understand its consequences both in the countries involved as well as at the international plane, and see in specific terms what the war meant to India. 13.1 Introduction. The First World War, you should remember, was the outcome of a chain of events taking place in Europe as well as in other parts of the world during the last 2 or 3 decades of the 19th century. You will find out in these pages that it was not merely a war but an event which made a tremendous impact on the world scene. It dismantled quite a number of the existing socio-economic and political structures. Our main objective here is to familiarize you both with the main causes of the war and its more important consequences. 13.2 Causes of the World War. The causes of the First World War are so complex that any attempt to describe them adequately would involve nothing less than the writing of the diplomatic history of Europe since 1870. In fact, we may have to go back to 1789 or even to the age of Louis XIV. The causes of this war are to be sought in the conjunction of various forces and tendencies which had been operating for a long time among the nations of Europe. However, let us look into some of the important factors which led to the First World War. 13.2.1 The System of Secret Alliances. The most significant cause of the war was the system of secret alliances. This was, as a matter of fact, the handiwork of Bismarck, who tried to build a network of such alliances against Germany's enemies after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. This move slowly divided into Europe into rival armed camps which confronted each other. The system of alliances, as you can guess, helped on some occasions in preserving peace, inasmuch as the members within one group often held their friends or allies in restraint from provoking war. But it also made it inevitable that if a war did come, it would involve all the great powers of Europe. From 1871 to 1890, Bismarck was the arbiter of European politics. As the Chancellor of the new German Empire, he wanted peace and declared that Germany was a satiated country. He knew that war, which had brought to Germany power and international prominence, would, if risked again, bring her only destruction. Bismarck thus stood for the maintenance of status quo and the preservation of the new balance of power which he had created by a system of alliances. He knew that France was Germany's irreconcilable enemy, particularly after the ignominy of 1870. So, Bismarck's diplomatic skill and political insight were employed in building up alliances for the protection of Germany. The enemy of Germany was France, and Bismarck's achievement was the diplomatic isolation of the country. In pursuit of this policy, Germany entered into an alliance with Austria in 1879 with the commitment of reciprocal protection in case Russia should attack either power. 3 years later, in 1882, Bismarck fomented the Franco-Italian rivalry over Tunis and persuaded Italy to forget her hereditary enmity towards Austria. A secret triple alliance was forged in 1882 between Germany, Italy, and Austria, explicitly defensive, in part against France, in part against Russia. France, rendered powerless since the Franco-Prussian War, looked upon this formidable alliance with grave concern. So long as Bismarck was at the helm, he maintained the system of balance of power, which he had completed by his reinsurance treaty with Russia in 1887. The nightmare of isolation haunted France. But after Bismarck ceased to be German Chancellor in 1890, his successors abandoned his skillful diplomacy. Some bitter mess arose between Russia and Germany at the Berlin Congress over the settlement of the Eastern question. France took advantage of this situation and, proceeding cautiously, was successful in forming an alliance with Russia in 1891. Thus was formed the Dual Alliance, which ended the period of isolation of France and served as a counterweight to the Triple Alliance. The abandonment of Bismarckian diplomacy by Germany led to some rethinking in the British diplomatic circles. The German emperor did not believe that Germany was a satiated power and called for an ambitious policy of a world empire. He also declared that the future of Germany lay upon the sea. This change in German policy was alarming enough for England and forced her to come out of the state of splendid isolation. It drew Britain closer to the Dual Alliance. In 1904, she made an agreement of Entente Cordiale, Entente-Cordiale, this is French word, with France, resolving all mutual differences. This was followed by a similar agreement with Russia in 1907. Thus, France, Russia and England formed a separate political group called Triple Entente, ENTENTE. As the Triple Alliance confronted the Triple Entente, the condition of Europe became one of armed peace. The continental powers of Europe, though at peace with another, kept a jealous watch upon their neighbors, and so atmosphere of fear and suspicion prevailed in Europe. There being apprehensions about the coming catastrophe, all the powers busied themselves with making feverish military preparations. This was the result of the split of Europe into two rival camps. This division of Europe into two rival armed camps has to be seen in the context of growth and expansion of imperialism, when European countries, seized with lust for trade and territories, were acquiring new colonies and contending against each other. Naturally, to make a mark in international politics by their material strength, it was necessary to build up militarily and politically. 13.2.2 Militarism. Militarism was actually closely connected with the system of secret alliances and was the second important cause of the war. This system of maintaining large armies actually began with the French during the Revolution and was later continued under Napoleon. It was extended and efficiently developed by Bismarck during the unification of Germany. After the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, the military and naval armaments of all the great powers tended to grow larger and larger. This armed race was quickened generally in the name of self-defense. It created fear and suspicion among the nations. If one of the countries raised the strength of its army, built strategic railways, its fearful neighbors were immediately frightened into doing likewise. So the mad race in armaments went on in a vicious circle, particularly after the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. Anglo-German naval rivalry was one of the contributory causes of the war. Militarism meant also the existence of a large body of military and naval personnel who were psychologically tuned to the inevitability of an early war. To these professionals, war held out the prospect of quick promotion and great distinction. It should not imply that they urged war for selfish motives and personal advancement. Nevertheless, the opportunity to put into practice the results of the preparation for war could not possibly have failed to produce its psychological effect. 13.2.3 Nationalism. Another very important cause of the war was the wave of nationalism which swept all over Europe. It was actually one of the heritages of the French Revolution. The resounding triumph of nationalism in Italy and Germany invested it with new vigor and made it a potent force in politics. The unifications of Italy and Germany were possible mainly because Cavour and Bismarck, Cavour, and Bismarck were successful in arousing the spirit of nationalism. In the process, it inflamed the racial pride of the people, stimulated them to exalt their country above all others, and made them arrogant in their attitude towards their neighbors. It was the excessive fervor of nationalism that intensified the rivalries of states like Germany and Great Britain and slide them to engage on a spirited naval and military competition. Shifted them to engage on spirited naval and military competition. It was aggressive nationalism that led the European powers to squabble over their interest in Asia, Africa, and the Balkans. It was the outraged nationalism of the French people that kept alive their spirit of revenge for the loss of Alsace, Alsace, and Lorraine, Lorraine, and made France the bitterest enemy of Germany. From 1866 onwards, relations between France and Germany remained tense. Napoleon III had behind him an aggrieved national opinion which nursed bitter jealousies against Prussia's strength. The delirium of nationalistic upsurge manifested in the outbreak of Franco-Prussian War in 1870 opened a new era of popular hysteria in international relations. There was also a cry of Italy al rendenta, Italy, unredeemed Italy, which was the expression of the national ambition of Italy to wrest from from Austria, the Italian-speaking districts Trieste, Trieste, and the Trentino, Trentano, which made Italy look to Germany for support. There were issues on nationalities along the western fringes of the Tsarist Empire, Tsarist Empire. Poles and Ukrainians and Finns continued to exert a strong centrifugal pull on the empire after 1870. The Russian policy towards these nationalities was of intense Russification, especially under the Alexander III between 1881 and 1894. It had the effect of turning the most extreme patriots of these national groups towards the Russian and social revolutionaries, who soon established links all over the religion. These local movements represented the spirit of radical nationalism, which was in ascendancy during this period. Lastly, the unassuaged UNASSUAGED national aspirations of the Balkan peoples made the Balkan Peninsula a veritable tinderbox which before long set all Europe ablaze. As a matter of the fact, the exuberant spirit of nationalism was at the back of most of the occurrences that gravitated towards the war. 13.2.4 Urge to Imperialism. Imperialism for our purpose refers to the purpose of capitalistic accumulation on a world scale in the year of monopoly capitalism. It led to the increase in the production goods, which forced the countries to look for new markets and new sources of raw material. It resulted in an increase in population, part of which was interested in emigrating to the still unoccupied regions of the world. The Industrial Revolution also resulted in the increase in surplus capital, which sought investment abroad, thus leading to economic exploitation and political competition. Due to these developments, the great powers began to partition Africa among themselves to secure territory of exclusive spheres of influence in China and to build railroads in Turkey and elsewhere. This struggle for markets, raw materials and colonies became a great passion during the late 19th and early 20th centuries because Germany and Italy also entered the race during the last 2 or 3 decades of the 19th century. By 1914, all the great European powers had secured something or the other in Africa. In the matter of railway construction, which was one of the most important forms of economic imperialism because it involved political as well as economic interests, one finds the English building railways from the Cape to Cairo, the Russians the Trans-Siberian Railway, and the Germans the Baghdad Railway. The first one came into conflict with the German, French and Belgian interests. The second was partly responsible for Russo-Japanese War, and the third caused endless friction between Germany and Triple Entente, ENTE. It was normally the economic interests coupled with political aims which made a country imperialistic. There was no compulsion to acquire colonies unless some active and influential group of political leaders wanted to push this policy. Britain did not embark upon the acquisition of colonies during the 1860s or even during the 1870s and after, though the economic urges of surplus population, exports and capital had been there for a long time. Neither Italy nor Russia had a surplus of manufactures of capital to export, yet both joined in the scramble. Germany, which was industrially much ahead of France, was slower in embarking on colonialism, largely because of Bismarck's anti-colonial policy. He wanted Germany to be supreme in Europe only. It was actually a group of men, particularly intellectuals, economists and patriotic publicists, and politicians who largely encouraged the growth of imperialistic tendencies by their propaganda and policies. Besides the direct political motives of imperialism, there was a medley of the other considerations which in varying proportions acted as an incitement to the desire for colonies. One was the activities of explorers and adventurers who were prompted by a genuine interest in scientific discoveries or a flair for adventure or love for money and power. Christian missionaries played their part too in the spread of colonialism. The most famous was David Livingstone, who was sent to Africa by the London Missionary Society. Almost all the European powers joined in this missionary activity all over the Africa and Asia. Other premier Christian missionaries who opened up in large measure Africa were Charles Gordon, Sir John Kirk and Lord Lugard, Lordlugard. John Kirk, Johnkirk. Charles Gordon, Charles Gordon. 13.2.5 Newspapers, Press and the Public Opinion. Another underlying cause of the Great War was the poisoning of public opinion by the newspapers in almost all the European countries. The newspapers were often inclined to inflame nationalistic feelings by distorting and misrepresenting the situation in foreign countries. On several occasions, when peaceful solution of the complex international problems could be possible, the jingoistic, Jingoistic tone of the newspapers in the countries involved in the conflict spoiled matters. The popular press went very far, sometimes to produce results in national and international politics. As early as 1870, the publishing of the EMS telegram by Bismarck immediately inflamed and embittered the extreme nationalist opinion in Paris and precipitated the Franco-Prussian War. This shows the incalculable harm the press could do in creating tension in European politics. 13.2.6 The immediate cause. The Austrian Habsburg Empire had to reckon with the challenge of surging nationalism since 1900. It was difficult to keep in check the multinational empire, especially when political and military leadership in Vienna lay in the hands of people like Count Berchtold, Berchtold, and Conrad, Conrad. They saw in Serbia another Piedmont, Piedmont, or another Prussia, and were reminded of the ignominious defeats their country had suffered in 1859 and 1866 at the hands of Cavour and Bismarck in the process of Italian and German unifications. By 1914, there had emerged a comparable movement for national unification of all slave people under the leadership of Serbia. It was a small country of just 5 million people, but had the energy and drive to make itself the nucleus of future Yugoslavia. Serbia was not only the sorest thorn in Habsburg flesh and an impediment to pan-German designs, she was also the spearhead of Entente influence in the Balkans. In fact, she could serve as a useful wedge in the WEDGE, in the German-Austrian-Turkish combination. The crisis caused by Sarajevo therefore did not remain a quarrel between Austria and Serbia, but took the form of a trial of strength between the two grand alliances. The incident which led to war was the murder of heir to the Habsburg throne by a fanatic whose connection with the Serbian government could not be established. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife visited Bosnian capital of Sarajevo on 28 June 1914 and was murdered by the Austrian Sero Gavrilo Princip, Gavrilo Princip. Vienna regarded the murder by Serbia as a provocation for war. Austria made demands which were bound to be rejected by Serbia. So, Vienna declared war on 28 July. The bonds of the alliance held firm and the two armed camps clashed at last. Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary, commented, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Check your progress 1. First one. Read the following statements and mark right or wrong. First one. In order to understand the causes of the World War, one would have to inevitably go back to the history of Europe in the 19th century. Option 2. The dual alliance was formed as a counterweight to the triple alliance. Third one. The emergence of nationalism resulted in mutual suspicion and hostility among the countries of Europe. Fourth one. The expansion of imperial urge in Europe provided the immediate cause of the war. Out of 4, you have to say whether it is right or wrong. For each and every 4 sentences are there. Number 2. Name the countries involved in the Triple Alliance. What was the purpose of the alliances? You have to give answer for this. Number 3. What was the impact of militarism on European countries? You have to give the answer for this. 13.3. Consequences of the war. You will see that the war in 1914 was in many ways entirely novel in human history. There had been wars in Europe before involving many states. This one, however, was a general conflict between highly organized states that had at their command all the resources of modern technology and were well equipped to find new methods of destruction and defense. It was the first war to dislocate the entire international economy, which had taken the whole of the 19th century to grow and take that shape. It was fought with determination and desperation by the belligerents because they believed that it was a war for survival and for high ideals. It was fought on land and above land, on sea and under the sea. New resources of economic and even psychological warfare were tapped because it was a war of the masses. It was a war between the peoples and not merely by armies and navies. It soon reached a point where military or civilian leaders found it most difficult to keep under check its future course of development. Obviously, any such conflict was bound to have far reaching consequences. We shall look at some of them here. 13.3.1 Loss of human lives. During the war, considerable destruction was done in terms of men and material. Millions of lives were lost. Russia was the heaviest loser with a toll of 2 million. Germany of nearly 2 million. France, along with her colonies, lost over 1.25 million. Austria nearly 1.25 million and the British Empire nearly 1 million. The USA lost around 1 lakh men. Some 10 million men lost their lives and most of these were under 40 years. More than twice that number were injured and almost maimed forever. The French calculations brought out that between 1914 and 1917, one Frenchman was killed every minute. This was certainly an unprecedented rate of casualties in any European warfare. This massive loss of human life definitely affected the structure of population both in sex and in age groups. The loss of life among women was much lower. Thus, in Great Britain, in 1911, there were 1067 females to every 1000 males. 1921, the ratio changed to 1093 to every 1000 males. This disequilibrium led to many social complexities and other related problems in the society. (13.3.2) Social and economic changes. The war in all the countries had the effect of accelerating the emancipation of women wherever the movement has started before 1914. Women over 30 were granted parliamentary vote in Britain in 1918. It happened because the war required a national effort, and in modern warfare, civilian morale and industrial production had become as important as fighting by the armed forces themselves. Women participated in all activities and worked on factories, shops, offices and voluntary services, hospitals and schools. They worked hand in hand with men and so won their claim of equality with them. It became easier now for them to find work in industry and business as traditional impediments were removed. Even the barriers of class and wealth were weakened to quite a great extent by the fellowship of the trenches. Social ethics changed quite significantly, and the war profiteers became a special subject of scorn and hatred. As compared to the previous European wars, the cost of war was certainly astronomical. During the 20 Years' War with Napoleon, Great Britain's debt had increased eightfold, while during 4 years between 1914 and 1918, it went up 12-fold. It was estimated that the total loss inflicted on warring nations was about $186 billion. When this huge money was siphoned, siphoned of OFF into destructive channels, human welfare, whether in education, health or other facilities, inevitably suffered. The whole fabric of pre-war civilization geared to the flow of world trade was violently disrupted. This economic dislocation actually proved to be the most intractable result of the war. The war had undermined the foundations of Europe's industrial supremacy, and after a gap of 4 years, when Europe began to lick its wounds and resumed its trade, it found that it was lagging far behind other countries. The USA made considerable progress in its exports, and in South America and India, new home industries came up and developed. Japan entered the textile trade and flooded the Chinese, Indian, and South American markets with its goods. The pattern of international trade was completely changed. When the European leaders gave a call for restoration of normalcy, which meant going back to the world of 1913, they failed to realize that a modern war is also a revolution, and the world of 1913 was as much as part of history now as the Habsburg and Roman of empires. It has been pointed out that all the economic slogans of the post-war years, strangely enough, began with the prefix RE: reconstruction, recovery, reparations, retrenchment, repayment of war debts, restoration of the gold standard, etc. In the post-war period, the triumphant nationalism in the Balkans proved violently intolerant of any settlement falling short of a balanced national economy. Nations with infant industries wanted to protect them, and old industrial powers like Britain and others felt that it was necessary to safeguard their shattered economies against the competition of new rivals. France was helped to recover economically by the restoration of Alsace and Lorraine and by the cession of Sierre coal miners for 15 years. But there were certain other economic problems which could not be solved through mere reparations from Germany. REPARATIONS. Belgium, for example, had a vital railway system disjointed by the demolition of its 2,400 miles of track, and only 80 locomotives remained in the country at the end of the war. Of her 51 steel mills, more than half were destroyed and others seriously damaged. This was actually true of all other countries. The initial stages of recovery were really a sad story because it involved finding work for the demobilized soldiers, homes for the people, and reconverting of industry to peacetime productions. 13.3.3 Democratic Ideals. Despite all its devastating consequences, the war brought democratic ideals and institutions to people who had not been acquainted with them before. The war had been declared to make the world safe for democracy. So obviously, the newly independent states were keen to set up democratic institutions. In one country after another, new democratic constitutions were adopted. Germany herself gave a lead by setting up a Weimar Republic, WEIMAR Republic, one of the most completely democratic paper constitutions ever written. It was modeled on the American, French, British, and Swiss democracies. But the bane of the new democracy was that it was superimposed upon a social order that had changed surprisingly little. The only common sentiment which bound the people was the universal national resentment against their defeat and the terms of peace imposed on them by the Allies. The new regime could not last long because it had no constructive ability to run its administration on democratic lines. Similarly, in other European states, the democratic institutions wherever set up, remained fragile because of their patchwork structure. For a short while after the end of the war, democracy came into vogue throughout the Europe. The war provided impetus to democratic forces all over the world. It was soon discovered that Western political institutions of parliamentary government were implanted in countries that had little or no experience in any sort of self-government. Nationalistic passions that had been aroused to a fever pitch by the war were responsible for the experiments, but the social and economic life was still much less advanced than in the West, and this proved to be the proverbial stumbling block. Even in the colonial empires of European powers, the urge for self-government and freedom got a stimulus. 13.3.4 The Conference of Paris 1919. The Conference of 1919 was a more representative body than the Congress of Vienna in 1815 had been. There were no crowned heads now, and most of the countries were represented by their premiers and foreign ministers. The only exceptions were President Woodrow Wilson, Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, and King Albert. In all, 32 states were represented. The time, place, composition, organization, and procedure of the conference all had some impact upon what it was able to achieve. As far as time is concerned, it was held 9 weeks after the signing of the armistice ARMISTICE with Germany, and was mainly timed according to the internal political consideration in the USA and Great Britain. President Wilson decided to attend in person, and so the conference was delayed till he delivered his State of the Union message to the Congress in December. In Britain also, Lloyd George wanted the elections before the conference, which were held in mid-December. At the height of victory, slogans like "Hang the Kaiser," "Make Germany Pay," and "Home Fit for Heroes" were raised. The election results drastically changed the composition of the House of Commons because hard-faced men who looked as if they had done well out of the war entered the parliament. The timing of the elections being what it was, this should have hardly been surprising. The venue of the conference was also a well-planned decision. Initially, Geneva was suggested, but President Wilson preferred Paris, where American forces were stationed in large numbers. It could also have been symbolic because the First German Empire had been declared in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles in 1871. Versailles, Versailles. Besides Premier George Clemenceau, who was the senior-most leader in the conference and was thus to preside over the deliberations of the conference, remembered Sedan well when France had been defeated after the Franco-Prussian War, and the choice of Paris was to be an answer to the defeat. The composition of the conference was even more important. It was represented not only by the Allies but also by the associated powers. Toward the end of the war, many countries entered war mainly to be a party to the final settlement. The three major omissions were the neutral powers, the Russians, who were still engaged in civil war and the war of intervention, and the former enemies, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey. The absence of these powers was significant in view of the developments in future. The absence of Germany in particular gave peace in Europe in the form of diktat, D-I-K-T-A-T, an imposed arrangement for which the Germans felt no responsibility or respect. This was to prove as one of the basic weaknesses in the settlement. The Conference of Paris was certainly the biggest peace conference ever held anywhere in the world, despite its limitations. There were 32 official delegations which covered 3/4 of the world's population. But as the war itself was a war of great powers, here too overall control was exercised by a council of 10. This body comprised 2 members each of the big 5, including USA, Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. Japan soon lost interest and stayed away, and by the close of April 1919, Italy also left. Ultimately, the famous Big Three ran the entire show. These Big Three, as you must be aware, were represented by President Wilson of USA, Premier Clemenceau of France, and Prime Minister Lloyd George of Britain. As pointed out earlier, the conference was finally a compromise between the two conflicting personalities of Wilson and Clemenceau. Wilson was an idealist committed to the principles of democracy and the covenant of the League of Nations. Clemenceau, on the other hand, was an old-fashioned realist obsessed with hatred for Germany, for whom French security was a matter of prime concern. The conference therefore turned out to be a conflict between the impulses of idealism and realism. Besides this, we cannot ignore the conflicts of impulses which raged within the hearts of all nations and of most statesmen. The conference was like the minds of men in 1919, haunted by a tension between hopes and ideals on the one hand and vindictiveness and vengeance on the other, which are natural reactions of people who had undergone oppression and whose latest experiences reflected hatred and fear. You can yourself imagine why a conference with this background could not achieve any tangible results. It was harsh where it could well be lenient, and weak when it was better to be strong. In the words of historian David Thompson, the Paris Conference must stand in history as a conspicuous failure, but it was an overall failure of human intelligence and wisdom, and in part of a failure of organization and method. This was not due to either an excess of realism or a lack of idealism, but rather to a misapplication of both. 13.3.5 The New Balance of Power. As you have read earlier, the Great War was not merely a war but a revolution in all walks of life. Like socio-economic and political dislocation of tremendous magnitude, there was also a problem of temporary redistribution of the balance of power in the world. As a consequence of this war, there was a military and political collapse of the old Russian, Austro-Hungarian, German and Turkish empires. The pre-war German and Austrian dominance for a time came to an end. The supreme task before the peacemakers was to see that Germany is kept in check and also weakened militarily. Another problem was to redraw the map of Eastern and Central Europe in the light of newly emerging realities of national grouping, economic viability and military security. To weaken Germany, several measures were taken. German forces were asked to evacuate all the occupied territories. Alsace and Lorraine were restored to France. Germany was not to fortify the left bank of Rhine, Rhine. Her army was reduced to 1 lakh men. She was prevented from arms production. Similar stringent measures were taken on naval and colonial matters. German navy was not to exceed 6 battleships of 10,000 tons, 12 destroyers and 12 torpedo boats. PEDO. No submarines were allowed. Germany had to give up all her rights over colonies. German Empire was distributed under the mandate to the Allied powers on the basis of the existing pattern of occupation. Later, the League of Nations was assigned the task of monitoring the administration of these mandated territories. The second important problem, as we were told earlier, was the reshaping of Eastern Europe. The Eastern question had been an intractable issue before the Western European powers for a long time, and the Great War further aggravated it. The old Austrian Empire was forced to cede most of its territories to Italy and other newly emerging nations in Eastern Europe. Hungary, the other half of the Habsburg Empire, received even harsher treatment. Serbia was the chief beneficiary, which was transferred into the new southern slave kingdom of Yugoslavia. Turkey itself went through an internal political upheaval as a consequence of defeats in the war. Mustafa Kemal Mustapha led a nationalist upsurge against the Treaty of Sevres, which was held between Turkey and the Allied powers. Due to this pressure, a new Treaty of Lausanne LAUSANNE was signed in 1923. Kemal gave up all claims over the Arab majority areas and renounced the Islamic basis of the Turkish state. A new Turkish republic was established under Mustafa Kemal's presidency. This resettlement of Eastern Europe, you can imagine, created nearly as many problems as it solved. It created a number of middle-sized powers such as Poland, Romania, and Yugoslavia. It led to the growth of Arab nationalism and Zionist hopes of Jewish national home in Palestine, which created complication which still creates international tension. The settlement also introduced a new problem of minority rights and its preservation. The whole settlement of Eastern Europe was actually made in the light of fear of the spread of Bolshevism into Europe. BOLSHEVISM. In the words of historian David Thompson, there was a strong inclination to make the eastern states, from Finland down to Poland and Romania, as large and strong as possible in order to serve as a cordon sanitaire, CORDON SANITAIRE, a quarantine zone to keep back the tide of communism. 13.3.6 The new international machinery. The League of Nations was a world organization contrived to replace the old system of power politics. It was a machinery for the peaceful settlement of disputes and arbitration, which replaced the old methods of secret diplomacy and separate alliances and quest for a balance of power. You are aware of the peculiarities of the international situation in Europe in 1914. It has been described as international anarchy, but it was actually semi-anarchy where the colonial and dynastic and national disputes threw the whole of Europe into terrifying ordeal of war. The scheme of the League of Nations was sponsored with great fervor by President Wilson. This was eventually modified to conform with British and French proposals. The League in one way was an elaborate revival of the idea of a concert of Europe into an international concert. In another light, it was something new and different, as here each participant swore to settle any mutual dispute through peaceful means and to share the responsibility in the event of aggression. The League was not at all a government but was a sort of facility to be used by all governments to maintain peace. We find that it was a very well-meaning and sensible body but could be successful only in certain assumptions about the post-war world proved correct. The major assumption was that all governments would want peace, a reasonable one due to their revulsion against slaughter and destruction. This assumption sounded more reasonable because, as you have seen in the earlier pages, there was growth of democratic states which were supposed to be more peace-loving than the earlier autocracies and dynastic empires. However, as pointed out earlier, these democratic constitutions proved fragile and interest in pursuing democratic ideals was short-lived. The hope that contented nationalism would move towards pacification also soon dispelled. So, in view of these believed assumptions, the League of Nations could not acquire the vitality and vigor of action which it required. The failure of USA to become a member of the League and exclusion of Germany and Russia made it a mere buttress of settlement. Japan was also lukewarm in its response. Only the British Commonwealth, France and Italy were its members. Italy soon defied it through its aggressive policy under the fascist leader Mussolini. The League failed in its supreme task of preserving peace. However, it did succeed in solving some minor disputes. Wherever the states sincerely submitted disputes to the procedure of conciliation, it worked well. It successfully settled the dispute between Sweden and Finland over the Åland Islands, AALAND ISLANDS, Åland Islands. On 3 occasions, the League successfully intervened in the disturbed Balkan area. The League also settled the Iraq and Turkey border issue. As pointed out earlier, the League did not have an effective machinery to enforce its decisions and so failed to maintain peace where the big powers were involved. Two important subordinate bodies of the League were the International Court of Justice and the International Labour Organization (ILO). The former was supposed to deal with disputes between the states and the latter with labor problems. Both these bodies form an important part of the structure of the United Nations today. (13.4) World War and India. Although not a direct participant, India could not, however, escape the effect of the war. The World War affected the Indian society and economy very profoundly. But it is important to note that the war had a different impact on different sections of the population. Among the poorer class of Indians, it meant increased misery and impoverishment. It also brought heavy taxation on the people. War demands created a scarcity of agricultural products as well as other daily necessities of life. As a result, there was a phenomenal increase in their prices. Driven to desperation, the people became ready to join any movement against the government. Consequently, the war years also became years of intense nationalist political agitation. Soon, India was to witness a massive mass movement called the Non-Cooperation Movement led by Gandhi, about which you will learn in a subsequent unit. On the other hand, the war brought fortune for the industrialists. It created an economic crisis in Britain, and for the war demand, they had to depend on Indian industries. Jute industry, for example, flourished in this period. In this way, the war promoted the industrial advance of India. The Indian industrialists took the maximum advantage of the opportunities offered. They made fortunes and wanted to preserve it even after the war came to an end. For this reason, they were prepared to organize themselves and support the organized nationalist movement. Thus, the war helped in bringing about a wave of nationalism among various sections of the population, although through different processes. India's independent economic advance also began to take shape, which was to grow in years. Subsequent units will explain these phenomena in greater details. Check your progress too. Question number 1. Write a note on the social economic changes brought about by the World War in various countries. Question number 2. Name the two subordinate bodies of the League of Nations. What were their functions? Question number 3. Which of the following statements are right or wrong? Unlike most previous wars, the First World War was fought not only between the armies but also between the people. Number 2, the loss of human lives during the war affected the structure of European population both in sex and age groups. Third, the World War hampered the spread of democratic ideals and institutions. Number 4, the war affected all the sections of the Indian population in the same way. 13.5. Let us sum up. Our aim here was to put forward before you the main causes and consequences of the First World War. You must have noticed that the only common and agreed objective of the Allies in 1914 was to crush Germany and diminish its hegemony in Europe. Hegemony. They did not go to war to bring about communist revolution in Russia, to destroy old empires, to establish new Arab kingdoms, or even to begin a new experiment of a League of Nations. The richest fruits were harvested by the semi-belligerents or non-belligerents. USA became a great economic power, Japan gained economic and naval strength in the Pacific, and India made great progress towards self-government. The victorious Allies, in spite of achieving certain particular aims, bequeathed to the world a most burdensome legacy of devastation, debt, poverty, refugees, minority problems, and inter-allied frictions. 13.6 Keyword. Allies, a group of countries or political parties who are formally united and working together because they have similar aim. Militarism, a policy of maintaining a strong military base. Premier, president or prime minister who is the head of the government of his or her country. Splendid isolation, a term used with reference to the British policy of non-intervention in Europe conflicts during the late 19th century. Status quo, the situation that exists at a particular time without any change being made to it. Eastern question, a term related to the problem in the Middle East, like the problem of declining Turkish empire, the struggle of European nationalists for freedom in the Turkish empire, and the conflicting interests of European powers in Turkey. 13.7 Answers to check your progress exercises. Check your progress. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 tick mark, 2 tick mark, 3 tick mark, fourth one is wrong. Second one, read sub section 13.2.1. Third, read sub section 13.2.2. Check your progress 2. 1. See sub-sec 13.3.2, 2. See sub-sec 13.3.6, third 1 correct, 2 correct, 3 wrong, 4 wrong. Over.